Okay, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. We're here today to talk about the gig economy and the future of work. Our goal today was to bring together several different perspectives to take a look at the gig economy. So we brought together some platform providers and network providers, as well as some talent leaders. So what I wanted to do was start off and have each of our panelists introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their organization, and how they're thinking about the gig economy. So, Iba, maybe I can start with you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And thank you to everybody for being here. So I'm Iba Masood. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Terra, which is essentially a Siri for product building. But so one of the things Terra does is that it essentially automates a lot of the workflows that happen around building a product. And once it maps out those workflows, it starts to assign those tasks to contractors that are primarily vetted software engineers. And so our contractors are essentially part of the gig economy. But what differentiates us from any other freelancer marketplace is that one of the aspects for our contractors is that they're making about anywhere between 25 to 40x of what they would be making on a regular freelancer marketplace. So if the average project on a marketplace is about $200, we're taking on larger Fortune 500 infrastructure software projects. And those are the types that our contractors are taking on board as well. And so what that enables each contractor to do is that they don't necessarily have to take on 20 to 50 freelancer projects every month. They just need to take on that one project through Terra. And they're working with companies like Cisco, Orange Telecom, and Ford on our platform.
Thanks, Kristen.
So I'm Kirsten Neville-Manning, and I work as the HR leader for a company called Teachers Pay Teachers, which is a platform where educators can come together and share their amazing material with each other. And prior to that, so I guess I'm in the talent management world. I was at Facebook for 5.5 years and managed international HR and global recruiting at various times in my tenure there. And then before that was at Google for about 7 years, also in the talent world and focusing a lot on international expansion. So I bring a different hat to the table, but very excited to be here.
Great. My name is Peter Harrison. I'm the CEO of Snagajob. And Snagajob is the largest platform for lightly skilled casual work in the US. We touch about 1 in 2 people looking for lightly skilled jobs. Think restaurant, retail, hotel, hourly workers every day throughout the States. We have 1 in 4 restaurants on our platform, 1 in 6 retail stores, and 1 in 8 hotels today. So big marketplace. And we're hard at work really essentially blurring the line between snagging a job and snagging a shift, essentially collapsing the time it takes to get a job to the point where it's just as quick to get a job as it is to pick up a shift in a roster where you're already working. So we launched a product earlier last year that allows you to, if you're a sandwich artist at one Subway, pick up a shift. If you want to pick up 4 shifts at another Subway, reach out, figure out what shifts are available, check in, check out, and get paid. So very, very excited to be here. It's a topic near and dear to my heart, and thank you for inviting me.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we're all quite different. So I'm Vishal. I'm the CEO of a company called Udacity. Udacity is all about lifelong learning. We focus in areas of becoming a software developer, data scientist, and most recently in the world of AI, including being a self-driving car engineer. Gig work has been fundamental to our ability to scale and provide that kind of cutting-edge education at a really cost-effective rate. It's also actually how we get our students jobs on a full-time basis ultimately, as it's a kind of a critical pathway to building trust in a brand new credential like ours.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Tamar Elkeles. I'm the Chief Talent Executive for Atlantic Bridge Capital, a venture capital firm. Before that, I was Chief People Officer for a Silicon Valley startup, and before that, spent almost 25 years at Qualcomm as their Chief Learning Officer and one of the heads of HR. And there, interestingly, I was at the company starting in 1992 when we had about 700 employees, and when I left about a year and a half ago, we had 31,000. So I saw tremendous scale within the organization and have a really similar perspective on being a practitioner within the space.
Great. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I wanted to start off and talk about probably something we've all heard about in the press, and that's Uber. And one of the questions that I think that has come out of some of the press they've gotten is, are they exploiting workers? And is the gig economy exploiting workers? So I wanted to ask you on the panel, and maybe tomorrow I'll start with you, and we can go through a couple. How do you respond to that?
I think the world of work is changing. I think that's, fundamentally the difference is people want much more flexibility, whether you're in an organization or whether you're doing a gig. At the end of the day, it's not 25-year careers anymore like I've had. People are moving all the time and really wanting a lot of flexibility. And I think that's what's changing more than anything. The millennial generation, the next generation that's coming, we're seeing different work patterns. And I think from an HR standpoint, we're not necessarily ready. We haven't changed a lot of our processes. We haven't changed how we manage benefits. We haven't changed how we manage work hours. But at the end of the day, we're mobile workers. And so for me, I think Uber is an opportunity. It's a challenge in some ways, but I think more often than not, it's an opportunity for people to have lots of different flexibility in their careers.
Yeah, I think the gig economy gets a bit of a bad rap because of what you described. For us, the ability to scale, as I mentioned, and actually just get access to talent that we wouldn't normally get. So when we launch a program in AI or to be a self-driving car engineer, normally you'd have to go recruit full-time people. And the ability to find full-time people that will relocate to Silicon Valley where we're based with the cost of living and everything else, that's a really tough road to hoe. By using this gig style approach, we're able to find folks that can grade, for instance, our students' projects, grade them whenever they want. We have several graders that will work for intense months at a time and then disappear, right? And as you're saying, a different generation pursuing their lifestyle totally differently. I don't think we're just exploiting those folks at all. In fact, we have several graders on our platform that make over $10,000 a month living in places where that's a lot of money. So while Uber, just because of the size of the company and the size of its workforce, gets a lot of pub, I think the gig economy is actually an incredibly powerful way to kind of get to know something, figure it out, and then actually work on your own schedule.
And they're not really doing it for the money. They're doing it because they want career growth. They want opportunity. And that's the next generation. I think that's what's really important is no one's doing that. Just Uber, those folks are not making a ton of money. It's not about the money. It's about the flexibility. It's about doing 10 different things in their career versus doing one thing.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I think, there are definitely people who are doing it to make a living and to earn. I think it's ridiculous to think of it as exploitive. I would stay away from companies, specific companies, because I don't think Uber is necessarily exemplary of a great brand from a reputation perspective. But I think the idea of the gig economy is fundamentally an empowering one. Yeah. It's one that is providing more and more opportunities to people who might not otherwise have them, and it's really less about unemployment at this point and more about underemployment and finding all those pockets of inefficiency where you have people who have a few hours here or a few hours there, and maybe people who need a few hours here and a few hours there, and there's massive underemployment today, and the gig economy is doing wonders to help with that waste.
Well, I think that's a great segue then too. So what do the workers in the gig economy, what do they really value? Kristen, maybe I can start with you with that one.
Yeah, I think sort of similar to the first point that was made, for me, I think taking it back to sort of first principles, what are people looking for? And I think part of it is flexibility that we've mentioned, and I also think a lot of it is about empowerment. And at Teachers by Teachers, we try really hard to make sure that we allow our staff to have flexibility, and we certainly think in our platform for educators, we're allowing flexibility in the classroom because they can come on our site and look for great material that other teachers have provided, or they can upload amazing material that they've made. And in that comes a lot of empowerment too, because you take control back in the classroom. And I think for our employees at TBT, that's super exciting, being able to work on a platform that allows that in this day and age is amazing. So I think about it as flexibility and empowerment.
Is there anything you would add to that?
I mean, there's really two fundamental shifts that are going on in the marketplace today. So according to Forbes, by the year 2020, we're going to see that over 50% of the workforce is going to be freelancing. So that's a pretty significant percentage. And when we look at, one of the things that I did before I even started Terra was that I spoke to just over 3,000 software engineers. I scheduled back-to-back calls where I would have at least 300 interviews per day. And this was specifically with folks that were freelancing and were doing, let's say, either 5 projects a day or 300 projects a month. And one of the things that we found was, yes, flexibility is actually the number one reason. A lot of them are traveling all over the world, and they have opportunities to work on all these different projects. But one of the biggest issues is that, if they suddenly have an increase in their personal spending, like for example, their dog gets sick or something along those lines, and they need to figure out like, where am I going to get that extra income? So the main thing I see is that with gig work, it needs to be consistent. Consistency is key, because if you talk to Uber drivers or any of the folks that are doing gig work, it's all seasonal. It's all dependent on demand. And so when we fundamentally started building Terra, we wanted to build a platform that would enable people to have consistent ongoing work. How can you promise a contractor that they're going to have 6 months or 12 months of consistent ongoing work with a large enterprise? And then, the other part of it is obviously what machine learning is going to do to the gig economy as well. I mean, today, there's 15,000 new projects coming into Terra every day, and the amount of data that we're crunching is pretty significant. And Terra is actually fundamentally understanding how do these projects work. And so we're automating certain parts of the software engineer's workflow as well. And so that goes, so whether you're talking about skilled work or unskilled work, what are robots, what is automation going to do to the gig economy? And how can we ensure that people are consistently upskilling so that they're going to have that level of opportunity and a consistent flow of income?
Mm-hmm. And that's a great point of how do we think about some of the traditional things we know that employees are looking for, like upskilling and training and career pathing in the gig economy. Peter, maybe you want to take that one?
Yeah, I just probably want to finish up on the flexibility thing. I think flexibility is king. We have a client that recently came to us that is losing, one of the major top 5 grocery chains in the country, losing workers to Instacart. And they're losing workers to Instacart who are paying 20, 30% less, who don't give benefits, who aren't giving job security. Why are they doing it? They're doing it because this has become the remote control for life, and now more and more people want it to be the remote control for work. And they get that with Instacart. They get that with a lot of these gig platforms where they can have that flexibility, where they have sort of the instant on capability. So I think that's key. I think on the skilling side, what the gig economy is doing is we're atomizing jobs that used to be big, complex things are getting broken apart into smaller and smaller pieces. And now we have an opportunity to really think about the taxonomy and the relationship between these different component pieces and how one capability feeds into the next, and how if we've got somebody who's a sandwich artist at Subway, there's only this much more skill they need to work at a Potbelly. Right? And I'm obviously talking at a very different end from a lot of the rest of the panel here, but it's a similar kind of problem that we have, thinking through that taxonomy, and yet we can do it now in fascinating ways as we break jobs into smaller and smaller pieces.
Vish, do you want to add on to that?
One of the things that's also worth noting too is like for instance, we don't gigify the entire company, right? So there's elements of what we do for our students that we use this more transactional approach, right? Creating projects, one-on-one help when the time is right, and those kind of services we provide students. We don't do that with the bulk of product folks and software developers. We have like an in-between status in folks who develop our curriculum, because we've found in our experience, for example, that it's somewhere in between a gig, as we were talking about here, and full-time work, which is like reasonable length contracted work, right? So when we want to get an expert who knows how to teach React, we found a guy at Facebook, right? And he's not leaving Facebook, but he's going to work for us for 3 months pulling that together. He kind of gets a chance to build his personal brand and being a teacher in this place.
Is
And he
that
goes,
legal though? So he has a job at Facebook and he's also doing a gig?
Facebook's been okay with that. In fact, we cut the deal with Facebook that allowed him to do that.
Okay,
Right?
so that's interesting too,
yeah.
because I think that HR hasn't caught up on how to manage this within organizations, you know, around benefits. Can you have multiple jobs? Can you do multiple things? Does it take away from your day-to-day work?
We've had this experience actually inside of our company too. So, you know, in high demand periods, like we launched the self-driving car engineer program last fall, and we were blessed with really high demand, which put us in a kind of frenzied state of being able to grade these projects. Right? So finding people with the right skills to grade these projects can be very difficult. We had our own student services folks. We have folks that are full-time employees inside the company who just did the math. They're like, okay, well, Vish is paying us, you know, $50 a project. I can do, once I learn the rubric, I can do like 3 of those an hour. They're like, he doesn't pay me that much now, you know? And like, there were several folks who wanted to find a way to go do that in their spare time. And this has been a battle inside our own company too. Like, how do we figure out the right way to handle that? So you're right. Traditional systems haven't caught up to this, but I think it's also worth noting that like, you have to break these traditional ideas of like what's allowed and not allowed, or you're gonna lose the person, right? Because I actually probably made I made a mistake the first time. We were kind of clear that if you're an employee, you couldn't go do these things. And I lost 2 of those folks who just quit and went and did it, right? And they prized the flexibility and the ability to earn because they thought their skills were worth it. And learn, right? And one of those people too, like, was you know, a more balanced person than some of us in the Valley, and like wanted to spend a lot of time building his boat. So like, he did it for a while. He made probably close to 2x what he would have made with us full time, and he took some time off in the system. So he's still a network creator, and he comes back whenever he wants.
I think it gives lots of flexibility too from a diversity standpoint. I mean, there's a lot of moms that are stay-at-home moms that want things to do. There are folks that are retired that want some things to do. There are people who are in different transitions in their own careers. And I think for them, it's a big opportunity to get them really contributing and getting them back into the workforce. So I think that's, for us, you know, a bias opportunity here to eliminate some of the challenges that people have with full-time employment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We have a growing number of opportunities where you don't actually meet the candidate before you hire them, and you know, you don't even necessarily see them or see a photo of them. So I think the opportunity, therefore, to sort of match people just purely on their merits and on their reputation, I think is a huge opportunity for everyone.
I have a really sweet story actually too. So we had this retired math teacher who was one of our graders, older gentleman, I think like in his late 80s. And like in the gig economy, you don't resign, right? You just don't show up to pick up a gig, right? So he wrote this really thoughtful email to us saying, hey, I'm gonna stop grading now because I think I'm just gonna spend more time with my wife. It was really quite sweet that he thought to actually resign as a gigster from us.
Yeah. The flip side of that is hourly workers don't get fired, they just don't get shifts.
Yeah, and you know, to add on to the point of unconscious bias, so when
Wait, I have to stop you because I don't think it's unconscious.
yeah, see the thing is,
Unconscious bias is not unconscious bias.
See,
You
the
just
thing
feel
is
better
that-
saying that. It's real bias.
one of the only reason I'm calling it unconscious bias is because then people that have the bias will say that
Oh, yeah, it's unconscious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why you want to call it unconscious bias.
Yes.
And you know, what you're trying to do is, because the way I see it is, all of us do have unconscious bias, and so. If you think about it from a mechanical standpoint, from a process standpoint, does that mean that we as humans can be effective recruiters? Can we actually effectively pre-screen or say that a candidate is better for a certain job? And do we typically base our decisions on, oh, did that candidate go to the same university that I did? Oh, great, you know, we're both like,
You want people
go
who are like
Lions
you.
or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So what we did was we actually, when we first started, we did an early study to see are software engineers that graduate from Ivy League schools more effective than state level college grads. And obviously, I mean, our hypothesis was a little bit biased early on. Like we knew that you cannot measure effectiveness or efficacy based on a school program or what university you've been to. However, human recruiters that are, it's funny I say human, I should just say recruiters, but it's just
Those old
we just
style
have to make-
recruiters.
Versus unhuman recruiters.
But so we did a test with about 300 recruiters at multiple companies in the Valley, and what we found consistently was that people were making decisions based on criteria that don't necessarily indicate effectiveness or efficacy. And so one of the things, initially when we started Terra, we were primarily focusing on full-time work. But what we found was recruiting is, I mean, yes, you can like build all of these AI unbiased systems for recruiting. The issue is that the final decision is always in the hands of the human recruiter. No matter like if AI is like helping to pre-screen or sending a set of, let's say, 10 candidates. So what we used to do was Tara would send 10 to 15 candidates and say, hi, Gary, I found these 10 candidates that are great for your position. I have only shortlisted them based on the effectiveness of the code that they've written in the past. And what we found was, even if those candidates would move forward, we would still see that a certain type of programmer would still make it to the final selection stage. And so we were like, okay, this model isn't working. Our whole goal was to enable some form of meritocracy in the Valley. And so what we decided to do is move to the contractor segment, where Tara just basically comes in, divides up the product into specific types of milestones, and then decides your contractors without having any form of human input. So companies today that are using the platform, Tara basically just comes in and within 24 hours is able to assign that contractor. Might be somebody who's a veteran in the Midwest. It might be a mom who's been out of, let's say, has not been working for the last year or so and has 10 years of product management experience. You fundamentally don't actually know who the person is. And so what we found is people are actually willing to allow AI to decide, like in terms of the final decision of who the candidate should be, if it's on the contracting side. Okay. And so yeah, to add on to the fact of unconscious bias, unfortunately, human recruiting hasn't reached a stage where we're completely blind. I mean, one other way to do it is just to have blindfolds in the interview process. And
right. Well, I think that brings up an interesting point of what else does HR need to be prepared for on the corporate side? And Kristen, I'd love to hear some of your view of, in addition to the way that we recruit, what are some other things that HR needs to be more prepared for?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this at a panel yesterday in terms of, I think of it a holistic sort of talent management. And I think companies and at Teachers Pay Teachers, we do this, and we did this at Facebook and Google. You think about what are the business objectives, what are you trying to achieve, and then linking talent to that. And obviously that varies by the different companies that we've got up here, and it will vary by the different companies that you're all supporting out there. And so at TBT, what that means is we look at it from the time we write a job description, we still are the doing phone calls side, and then through to even looking at data at every single point of their employee's life cycle with the company, and also doing surveys and things on the way out of a company as well, to understand what could we have learned, what went well, what didn't. And even today, actually, I was talking with a colleague who's here, Emily, about we are very transparent. We try to be also on the HR side with the data that we're collecting and sharing it back with the company so that our employees feel empowered and understand, or at least we hope try to understand the decisions that we're making and how it links back to the business. And similarly, we're also trying to be that transparent with the community that we serve. So we have a lot of our product managers, our engineers, our great community team try to make connections and have deep connections, some of them with our vast community, to make sure that we're being transparent with what we're building at Teachers Pay Teachers to support the educators that are on the platform, and making sure we're really hearing from them about what they need and integrating that into the work. So again, it's a huge sort of array of different things that we do, but we try to get data along the way.
Okay. Tamar, anything you would add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think in general, the laws need to start to change around what is part-time work, what is full-time work, how do we manage benefits, how do we manage employee complaints, how do we manage learning and development, how do we manage time? You know, there's still this whole notion about work hours and non-work hours, and if you're on your mobile device after work hours, if you have learning and development that's after work hours, all of that has to go away, and I think that there's a big push, I know from corporations today, in trying to figure out how do we manage that differently, but I think we're very far behind.
Thanks. And it's interesting because a lot of the things we said is there's some benefit to workers, there's some things that are hard for HR, but what are some of the benefits for corporate? What should corporate be looking forward to with the gig economy?
I mean, for us, it's been fundamental to scaling, right? So we went from around 10,000 active students to, we just crossed around 30,000 students in the space of 6 months. And there's just no way we would have been able to hire folks in the Valley with those skills in that time frame. We just wouldn't have been able to do it. So speed and flexibility has been a key benefit for us. Cost is actually the last element. Like, I would have hated to turn away students. That would have been awful. I mean, thankfully, we didn't have to.
Peter, anything you'd
Yeah,
add?
I'd agree. You know, scalability, flexibility. You know, they're clearly it's much easier to move when you don't have to know that the decision you're making is necessarily a long-term decision. So you can make lots of little small decisions, and move much faster as a result.
You know, one of the things I'd point out too is like, and you can probably comment from your experience. I don't know how many times you'd ever have a conversation inside of a company of like, really frequently, how in touch with you with keeping your employees happy. You have them from time to time, and you tend to have them because, like, you know, business gets in the way and everything else. With our marketplaces of folks, like, our product managers need to be widely aware of what it takes to retain and engage those folks to do this work for our students. Because if we don't, fundamentally our business stops. So we always have to be like thoughtful about what we're going to pay folks, our rate of increase of those things, the flexibility we provide about those things, the feedback loops and systems, right? So just because we have this Uber-style rating of a student grading a grader's feedback of theirs, like, we have to be thoughtful about how that's implemented so as not to alienate those folks, right? So we're actually way more accountable to our labor in many ways in this instance than I am with my full-time employees, right? Because your full-time employees have periodic performance reviews and everything else, and then at the end of the day, this comes down to like the supply-demand imbalance or balance, right? You know, Uber gets all this press because at the end of the day, low-skilled jobs, like the relative availability of that workforce is high, and so they don't have the same power position as right there too.
That's a great point. When we rolled this out first with employers, whether worker could rate the employer, initially the employers were very, very skeptical about it, especially if they thought they were going to be singling out people. And when we said, no, we'll just rate the location. We're just going to rate the location on what it was like to work at that location. Then all of a sudden it became okay, because now it's like, I want to know what locations you know, people like working at, what locations they don't like working at. That's actually really valuable insight, and I can use that to grow and learn.
That's great. And I think it leads me to the question, Tamar, we talked about at the beginning of this panel, and probably lots of you have heard everybody talking about culture here, that today culture is so important to getting our work done. It's one of the biggest drivers to our outcomes. And how do we think about maintaining the culture in this gig economy where people may be coming in and out of the location or the job site, and we don't necessarily see them again? So let me start with you, and then I'll ask others to weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I think culture is, critically important. The biggest thing in my mind from how do you maintain culture or evolve culture or sustain a culture or change a culture is through storytelling. I don't want to get weird on religion or anything, but we think about religion in general, right? And none of us were there, but somehow we still tell the story, right? And that's the same thing in companies. I mean, what I've seen that's very successful is find the stories within your organization, stories about a great leader, a team of people, something that failed, something that succeeded, and start telling those stories and sharing those stories. Whether you're a gig economy or whether you're in a gig job or a full-time job, it doesn't matter. You're still creating a culture of a company and a place where people want to work, and it's the power of the storytelling. So when I was at Qualcomm, we did something called 52 weeks. So we would share a story a week with every employee. And you could do this with gig employees as well, it doesn't matter. And we first started sending it out as an email. We'd send out a story every week, and it was a story about the founding of the company, and then the next week was a story about a team, and the next week was a story about a leader, and the next week was a story about a failure, a different project people were working on. And then we eventually evolved it to be an online website. But at the end of the day, it started out as something for new employees. Every week, send them a story. And then I got a call from our CEO at the time, and he said, hey, Tamar, I got a new employee called me and said, I really like week 7. What is this? And I said, oh, it's a storytelling thing. He said, I want it too. So by the time I left Qualcomm about a year and a half ago, we had 27,000 people that were getting the stories. And it's very simple to do, very cheap to do, but it's a way to communicate culture constantly, by constantly sharing those stories within the company.
And I think you could argue that culture becomes even more important in a world where people may have 3 or 4 or 5 jobs simultaneously, and you're trying to earn their loyalty and the stickiness to your platform. So especially if they've got a day job and a night job and 2 day jobs, and any way that you can draw people and hold people that isn't just purely monetary.
I mean, this is where regulations have to change actually though too, because my own lawyers and HR folks will push back
Don't
on.
talk to the lawyers anymore, because they're the worst. I don't know if there's any lawyers in this room,
I just
but
moved
they're
away.
the worst on this
I just
stuff.
moved to a different part of the building. But the point is, like, because of the way the laws work around what the definitions are,
Yes.
it actually injects fear into companies. Like, I try to
Correct.
resist it too, but like, I should be able to share all the same
Yes.
things.
Yes.
But like, I get internal pushback even too
Yes.
about, well, hey, I don't know if we should do that because that's going to jeopardize the status. We've got them in this
Yes.
way, and we might, in the state of California, have exposure to X, Y, and Z. I think that's kind of BS. Like, the fact is, like, if I want to retain those folks, I want to push all that good stuff to them too, right? They should feel included.
But
They
if
should
you
get the
treat
T-shirt.
them like a regular employee, then you have issues legally,
That's
right?
what I'm saying.
I
So, like,
know.
and so it puts me in a bad spot, or
Yeah.
puts us in a bad spot
Yeah.
that way. So we're trying to actively fight it. We tend to go at the edge of that. I don't have client confidential here, do I? But like, we try to push it so that we can retain these folks, right? Because I feel we have to earn it every day.
Right. Kristen, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think, well, just at culture activities, it's sort of the essence of what you do. And I think for us it starts with sort of what's the mission, which is to help support educators to teach at their best. And aligning with that is super helpful because I think it's sort of your guiding star as you go through a day. And as we think about sort of all the programs that we do, it's going to that end result. Like, what are we doing as a business to support those educators? And I think you can also distill out of it, and we try to at TBT, sort of what are core sort of work values around that? What do we mean by that? Trying to define it, because I think that helps provide a sandbox for our employees to work in and know, when they're sort of on path and when they're not, and trying to be super sort of clear about that, and simplifying the message too as much as we can. I think sometimes it can be overcomplicated. And I think one thing I learned, I think at Facebook actually we did an amazing job of distilling down sort of some of the values and key drivers that really helped us build the company that we have today.
I think a lot of that's around reinforcement and rewards. Employees see what you reinforce and what you reward. Who gets promoted, who got the bigger bonuses, who got the interesting project to work on. So don't underestimate the optics of what's going on in the organization as a culture driver, right? So you may say something like, we value teamwork, but then if you look at the performance management process, it values individuals, right? So if you're really about teamwork and about collaboration, change your performance management system to be focused on valuing team and giving the team the reward, not the individual the reward, because then you're in competition. So there's a lot of little things that companies need to do to really think about how do you reinforce the culture that you want within the company.
I want to come back to the idea of corporate risk and what we need to do to overcome some of the risks of a corporation. But first, I'd love to hear your thoughts on culture. And when you're hiring through an AI, how does culture play into the work that gets done then?
Well, I mean, see, the thing is that all of the learnings that we're mentioning today and everything that we're saying is based on the last 50 to 80 years of HR and what the world of work looked like. What we need to be doing is thinking about the future, like in terms of what will the next 20 years of work look like? How are multiple processes, how is legal going to change when there's going to be bots that are going to be looking at past data and basically making recommendations on that? So the multiple departments are going to change. There's no doubt about that. And so what I see primarily is that culture is really about individuals and like what, and in some ways it's top down, but it's also bottom up. So like, for example, at Terra, just to give concrete examples. So we have our full-time team, and then of course we have our contractors that are managed through Terra as well. We eat our own dog food. About half of our actual product is built by Terra contractors and is managed by Terra. I know that sounds a little confusing, but so the way we see it is, I mean, and what Tamar and Vish mentioned in terms of continuing to send those positive notes and all of the news to like your contractors as well as your full-time workers. So one of the things we do is everybody, I mean, in terms of the information that is shared, it's shared across both divisions. So we're 13 people full-time, and then we have another 10 people that are managed by Terra. So I mean, we're still very small. Like with about 23, what we're seeing here is everybody's essentially treated equally in terms of like the level of information that is shared, any information about our code or IP, all of that. But so one of the things we're doing is that the large corporate customers that we have, what we're attempting to do is convince them and talk to them that how can they benefit from a massive workforce pool that's been vetted and whose code, like we actually look at the repositories that they have on GitHub and other platforms, but how can they benefit from this massive workforce that is already out there, and they can essentially build out teams of people within hours rather than going through a full recruiting process. So I mean, if you think about and it sort of plays again back to your Uber point, which is, when we were initially calling taxis, I mean, it was a cumbersome process, and now it's just one click. So imagine like what HR processes and recruiting processes are going to look like when, again, it's one click. With one click, you can have employees or workers coming into your office and immediately starting to work at that point. You're seeing shorter ramp-up times as well, because in a lot of cases, the people that are coming into work are familiar or have done similar work in the past. And so they're able to execute very quickly. And yeah, please.
Yeah. So I think that's a great segue into the risk element, because the recruiting processes are in place to help manage some of the risk that goes into it. So how do you think about, and I'll start with our HR talent experts, how do you think about some of the risk that's involved in the gig economy, and how do we start to remove that, whether it's through one-click hiring or something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's risk on both sides, right? There's risk for an employer that the people are going to leave, or that they're going to take that knowledge. I mean, that knowledge management component is really important. People come in, they're doing a gig, and then they leave, and you don't have a way to capture the knowledge that they had or the contribution that they made in the organization. So that we haven't figured that out yet. That is out there. But I think there's also a risk. There's less risk for the gig candidate, because they're not signing up for a long-term job, right? They don't have to say they're fully committed forever. And from an employer standpoint, I think it changes our risk as well, because if those people leave, we don't have to lay them off. If we change our business, if they leave, we don't have to pay them a severance. I mean, there's a lot, on both sides, there's this risk component. And I don't know if that's because the next generation doesn't want to take the risk of making a full commitment to a company, or as organizations were changing and our markets are changing and there's so much disruption that's happening, we're not even sure if we're going to be around next year. So we don't want to have all these labor costs of people that we might need to lay off or pay severance to. So I think on both sides, it's really changing the employer-employee relationship.
I actually think I have a lot to add on that. But
Okay. Peter or Vish, anything to add on?
No, that risk profile is I mean, it allows us to take more risk, actually, right?
Yeah.
So we can build wildly speculative things to teach and limit our exposure
Right.
if we screwed up, because we've done that, right? We've launched total duds a few times, and I would have had to lay off people, and
Yeah.
that's not fun.
Hate it.
Yeah, I think there are really three key elements here with the gig economy. Number one is people want to take flexible work, but at the same time, they want to have the same benefits that a full-time worker would. And so, for example, like there's a massive opportunity right now for a startup to just come in and offer health benefits too. And I think there are a couple of companies that are working on this as a
I think we should do that. I think we should. I mean,
Well,
I think that's crazy
so-
to just think that healthcare is just for full-time employees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and the thing is that a lot of, you can even think of a lot of entrepreneurs and founders as gig workers as well, because technically we're employed by our company, and in some cases, like when we first started, for example, I was still getting my immigration sorted. I only moved to the US 2.5 years ago. So, the first 8 months of our company, I didn't have health care. So I was trying not to get bruised or hurt at any given point. But so, thinking about it from that perspective, and the freelancers that we spoke to earlier as well, they were saying they had similar concerns. And so there's the healthcare and benefits aspect. The other aspect is with the risk profile, it's security, really. That's what Fortune 500 companies are afraid of, right? I mean, it's basically that can we share the same level of information that we share with our full-time employees with workers that are going in and out, whether it's from an IP standpoint, whether it's their code base, their infrastructure. And what we're going to see over time is that more and more companies are going to become transparent, open, flexible, and going back to certain points that were actually made throughout the seminar about millennials wanting more flexible work. Firstly, I can't believe I said the word millennial. I promised myself I wouldn't. But going back to that, we all want stability, but at the same time, we also want that flexibility to be able to not have to give 3 weeks notice for, let's say, to take 1 day off. And then the other aspect of this is, at the same time, we want interesting work, like at the same time that's fulfilling and that allows us to see that we're making a difference.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to just reinforce this benefits issue, which is at the heart, I think, of the problem we have with the gig economy right now, is this bifurcating of W-2 and 1099. I think it's a huge, huge problem that we have to figure out, because without it, I mean, companies are going to be innovative and creative and find ways around it, but it is coming to a head, and it's going to create, ultimately it is going to create, challenges for both sides in a really negative way. So I think at least some model of portable benefits where multiple companies may be contributing to benefits. I think we need some major innovation in the space for it to really take to the next level. It's going to grow anyway, but it's going to be very messy until we have a way to marry the contributions by multiple companies into one benefits plan.
And just from an HR standpoint, I mean, I think HR folks would like to see it equal, even playing field, to not have to worry about, we can't share this information, or those people are only 32 hours instead of 40 hours.
Yeah.
I think it's the lawyers that we need to focus on, and changing employment law, and changing, because they're policing all of this, and they're the ones that are putting fear in around the risk that you're taking. So I think it's really a legal question and a commitment that we need to get from employment litigation.
I think there's the benefits issue, and then there is the advancement issue, right? So with all the flexibility we're talking about, that clearly is a great value for the folks who value that. But many people do want to grow, right, and want to get somewhere else aside from the transaction that they're doing. And I would say, like, we haven't done a great job of that yet. Like, that's something I know we have to tackle next, is like, if we want to keep that fabulous machine learning grader in our system, I can keep trying to pay them more, but I also probably need to give them a way to level up in that too, right? Like, maybe they're an onboarder of other graders, or like, we've started to experiment with some of those things, but we haven't really fully embraced. We talk about this for our full-time employees all the time, like how do we provide them with pathways to advance themselves so we don't, the Valley can be a very mercenary place with employees, like, average tenure is really, really low. So you want to get like a reasonably productive couple of years out of somebody, you better have an upward track for them. I think we're going to have to address this as this becomes bigger too, because you're going to want some way to at least maybe get reputation out of it, or give yourself more pricing power in the marketplace, whatever it is. Like, that's going to have to get addressed too, or the platforms that don't do that, I think, will lose the ability to retain.
Yeah, and then it also goes back to, like, some gig workers make more than others because they have more negotiating power, they know how to negotiate. So like if a platform can negotiate on their behalf, I mean that, and also, like, you need to have a level playing field where people of the same skill are essentially making the same salary, which then that's where you have a true meritocracy, really, which would be difficult, but I think we need to, like, work towards that at the very least, where we see more women as gig workers, whether they're software engineers or Uber drivers, but one of the things, what I really like about the gig economy is that you can build more diverse workforces at the end of the day, because you're more willing to allow people from one way or another. I feel like companies are willing to sort of be more open to having contractors, especially when they have, like, a dire need on that front.
Right, it's not as risky. We have somebody for a little bit of time. And Peter, you had talked about your system of how people get rated. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, so they get some advancement that goes with that?
Yeah, so we actually ask both, similar to the sort of Uber model, we ask the worker to rate the location, not the employer, but the location, after each shift, and we ask the employer to rate the worker when they approve the hours, so it happens at each transaction, whereas before it was happening at the job level, now it's happening at the shift level. And to be honest, the ratings are helpful, but what we've learned is that the real value is behavior, of course. So it's will they invite them back? That's a more telling. That's ultimately more important, and a more important signal. Will that worker want to go back and work in that location? Will that location want to have that worker back? Is the data that I think really ends up speaking much louder than the ratings.
Yeah. I like the double-sidedness of it, right? The worker and the
Yeah. Yeah, I think it does. It creates a more level field when the ratings are happening in both directions. And I think, we talked a lot about this, of course, but you are more respectful. I'm more respectful when I get into a lift because I know it's affecting my reputation, and they're more respectful to me because it's affecting their reputation, and neither of us are treating it like a transaction, even though it is inherently transactional. Mm-hmm. Now, for the first time, there's a relationship element that the technology infuses that means that we are, both of us, looking to build our brand.
Yeah.
I was going to just add to that, I think it reminded me at Teachers Pay Teachers, one of the things we do for what's called check-in, which is, everyone thinks I say chicken because of my New Zealand accent, but it's check-in. And we do it every 12 weeks, and it's the ability for, I made it actually coming out of Google and Facebook where we didn't have we did have some two-way, but we made it at TPT very two-way feedback for managers. So every 12 weeks, an employee and their manager sit down and fill out the same form. It's very light, it's one of my other keys was very light, but they tell each other, they give it to each other, and they've basically said, hey, you're doing these things really well, you're not doing these well, and let's have a discussion about it and see where we're aligned and see where we're not. So sometimes my employees will say to me, you're doing this well, and I'll be like, oh, you thought I was? I didn't think I was. And they would say, you're not doing this well, and I'll be like, really? I thought I was nailing it. But it's really helpful, and to have that more real time, I think, is something we're seeing more and more across the workplace. And certainly at TPT, I think it's been really valuable to make sure we're adjusting. And similarly, we're also meeting with our community. One of our learner programs is we have to go into schools as employees, and we have to partner with, be in a classroom with educators and seeing what they're doing. And as HR, my work is a little bit more removed, but it informs so much about what I do when I come back, about where are we going, what is the alignment. And so even having that with our community and the people we serve outside of the company has been really beneficial, I think, for our growth.
What's interesting is that if you think about how often performance reviews happen in a full-time job versus how often they happen in a gig position,
you're going to be better off.
Exactly, because technically you're being rated for every whatever sort of
activity.
Transaction.
It could be every day, it could be every hour, but it's so transactional. So in some ways you actually have more opportunities to improve, but the idea is that you need the feedback. So if any of you are building platforms that are scoring individuals, one of the most important things is to build some mechanics into it where you're essentially informing the individual as to why they were scored a certain way, and then giving them feedback as well so that they can improve on their score. So if you are giving them feedback on how they can improve their score, then that means you're giving them access to some form of educational materials as to how they can improve whatever they were.
Yeah, the trend in performance management, though, in most corporations is to get rid of scoring in general and to just focus on feedback. I mean, it should really be about development discussions, and that does change with the gig economy, but I do think at the end of the day, whether you're working on projects or whether you're as a full-time employee, it's always about attraction, development, and retention. And those are the three key things, and then there's feedback all the time. So I tend to disagree that performance management, performance reviews are happening every 6 months or every year. It's really not. A lot of the performance management today has really changed, where it's about development discussions, it's about constant feedback, and that quote-unquote review is just something that you do at the end of the year to really set goals for the next year, but there should be no surprises. There should be that constant
and
feedback.
Just to be clear, at TPT ours isn't a review. It is a developmental discussion. It is a dialogue, and there's no rating.
I'm going to have to stop us now. We're out of time. So thank you all. We've been at zero for probably a minute or two now, so I'm going to have to stop us. Thank you all so much for your time today. Appreciate your thoughts on the gig economy.
Thank you.